My sister was thrilled when she inherited everything, and I got nothing. But soon I became a millionaire thanks to what she considered worthless. You know that feeling when you're standing outside a house that used to be home, but now feels like a museum of your own failures? That's exactly where I found myself on a gray Tuesday morning in suburban St. Louis. Eddie Carmichael, 45 years old, professional disappointment, staring at the same windows I'd looked through as a kid. But this time, I wasn't coming home for Christmas dinner. This time, I was coming to watch my family divide up what was left of my father's life. The thing about being the family screw-up is that people stop expecting much from you. And honestly, sometimes that's a relief. My resume was shorter than a grocery list, and my bank account had seen better decades. While my younger sister Sarah was inside, probably already measuring spaces for a cactus collection, I stood on the sidewalk like a monument to wasted potential. Her husband Owen, the self-proclaimed business genius, was likely discussing how to turn Dad's front lawn into a putting green. They'd been running the house like their personal kingdom ever since Sarah married up 10 years ago. See, when Mom died, Sarah was barely 13, and I was 18. Dad, bless his heart, dealt with grief the way most men do, by throwing himself into work and pretending emotions don't exist. But somehow, all that bottled-up love got redirected to Sarah. She became the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Me, I became the cautionary tale, the black sheep everyone would point to and whisper, "Well, at least you're not like Eddie." The moment I turned 19, I bolted. Couldn't get out of that house fast enough. I thought I was escaping to find myself, to build something meaningful. What I actually found was a series of dead-end jobs, failed relationships, and the crushing realization that running from your problems just gives them time to multiply. My visits home became holiday obligations, awkward dinners where Owen would dominate every conversation, and Dad would nod along like a bobblehead. But you know what kept me sane during those dark years? Memories of Grandpa Joe's farm. That place was my Narnia, my escape hatch from the suburban suffocation. While my family was all about appearances and status, Grandpa Joe lived like the real America still existed. His farm smelled like sunshine, fresh earth, and honest work. Not like these artificial smiles and passive-aggressive family dinners. Grandpa Joe was the closest thing to a hero I'd ever known. He taught me that real value wasn't in gold or stock portfolios, but in the grain that grows from dirt under your fingernails. That man could make magic happen in his kitchen with nothing but basic ingredients and love. His cookbook, this beaten-up notebook covered in flour, fingerprints, and coffee stains, was like a treasure map to a world where things actually made sense. I remember him saying once, "Life's like a cookbook, Eddie. If you're not willing to risk it with new ingredients, you'll never taste a real masterpiece." At the time, I thought he was just talking about cooking. Now I realize he was talking about everything that matters. But life has this way of taking your last bit of hope and stomping on it with steel-toed boots. Enter Karen, my so-called great love, who'd been swearing her devotion just a week before she tossed me out like yesterday's leftovers. I was still digesting our last pizza together when she delivered the knockout punch that would make heavyweight boxers wince. "Eddie, you're going nowhere fast," she said, her voice colder than a Minnesota winter. "I need a man who can secure my future, not someone who lives in the past. My new boyfriend? He's a banker." A banker. The irony was thicker than Mississippi mud. I didn't even have a bank account worth securing, let alone a future worth investing in. But there it was. My diploma in failure had just been upgraded to a PhD. At least now I was officially free to be a total mess without any obligations. So there I was, standing outside Dad's house, mentally preparing for the reading of his will. I knew exactly what was coming. Everything would go to Sarah, and I'd walk away with nothing but memories and maybe a guilt trip about not visiting more often. The surprise wasn't that I got nothing from Dad's will. Hell, I'd have been shocked if I had. But then the lawyer cleared his throat and mentioned Grandpa Joe's will. Now, Grandpa had died about 2 years before Dad, and we'd all assumed his affairs were settled. Turns out Grandpa's old lawyer had passed away right after the will was written, and the paperwork got stuck in probate purgatory until now. Sarah's face went from confident to confused, like someone had just told her that money doesn't grow on trees. Owen, who'd probably been mentally spending millions, looked like he'd swallowed a live frog. Everyone expected Grandpa to leave behind some dusty chest filled with gold coins or maybe stocks in the Depression era. Instead, he left something that made the whole room go silent. He left his farm. To me, to the family disappointment. The one who couldn't even keep a woman interested long enough to split a pizza properly. The farm that everyone else saw as a worthless pile of old wood and rusty equipment. I saw as the last piece of real happiness I'd ever known. While Sarah and Owen were calculating property values and development potential, I was remembering summer afternoons helping Grandpa with the beehives, learning that sometimes the sweetest things come from the most unlikely places. You should have seen their faces. Sarah looked like she'd witnessed a ghost, and Owen's expression suggested someone had just told him that business school was a scam. The whole room erupted in whispered arguments and barely concealed outrage. How dare the old man leave valuable property to the family washout? How dare he reward a lifetime of poor choices? But sitting there, watching my relatives implode with entitlement and greed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. Like maybe, just maybe, fate was dealing me one last hand in a game I'd been losing my entire adult life. Grandpa Joe had always seen something in me that nobody else could. Maybe he still believed in that scared 19-year-old kid who'd fled home looking for himself. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that it gives you a solid foundation to build on. I'd lost my job, my woman, my dignity, and apparently any chance of inheriting from my father. But suddenly, I had something nobody expected. A second chance wrapped up in 40 acres of memories and possibility. As I watched my family argue about property taxes and market values, something shifted inside me. That beaten-down feeling that had followed me around like a lost dog suddenly lifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I could build. Mark Twain once said, "The two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why." Standing in that lawyer's office, watching my relatives rage against an old man's final surprise, I finally understood why I'd stumbled through everything else. I wasn't meant for their world of appearances and expectations. I was meant for something real, something that mattered. Grandpa Joe had given me more than property. He'd given me permission to be myself, to stop apologizing for not being who everyone else wanted me to be. That farm wasn't just land and buildings. It was a chance to reconnect with the part of myself I'd lost when I left home all those years ago. So while Sarah and Owen plotted their legal challenges and calculated their losses, I made my own calculations. I figured out what it would take to get that farm running again, what it would mean to honor Grandpa's memory by bringing his land back to life. For the first time in decades, I had a plan that didn't involve running away from something. Walking out of that lawyer's office, I felt like I was walking out of my old life entirely. The family that had never understood me was furious about losing money they'd never earned. The woman who'd thrown me away for a banker was probably already spending someone else's money. And me? I was heading toward something that actually belonged to me. That evening, driving past suburban developments and strip malls toward the county roads that led to Grandpa's place, I realized something profound. Sometimes what looks like failure is just life clearing the deck for something better. Every door that had slammed in my face had been pushing me toward this moment, this chance to build something meaningful with my own hands. The farm looked rough when I first pulled up that night. Weeds had claimed the garden. The barn needed work, and the house hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the Clinton administration. But standing there in the fading light, breathing air that smelled like possibility instead of disappointment, I knew I was finally home. Looking back at those angry faces in the lawyer's office, I understood something they didn't. What they saw as worthless inheritance, I saw as priceless opportunity. My ticket to an unknown, but potentially beautiful future. The real work hadn't even started yet, and neither had the real surprises. And that, my friends, was just the first chapter of the strangest adventure of my life. Little did I know that what everyone else considered nothing would become my only hope. My chance to prove that sometimes the biggest losers are just winners who haven't found their game yet. Moving to Grandpa Joe's farm was like starring in my own survival reality show, except the cameras were broken and the producers had no clue what they were doing. That would be me, the producer. The first week, I couldn't tell a tractor from a combine harvester, and after buying a few chickens from the local market to get things started, I swear they were judging my life choices harder than my family ever did. Here I was, a city boy who'd accidentally wandered into the wilderness, trying to channel my inner farmer when I barely knew which end of shovel to hold. But you know what? Something magical started happening. My hands developed calluses that felt like badges of honor. My face got dirty in ways that soap commercials would never approve of, but for the first time in years, I actually felt alive. The smell of fresh-cut grass was better than any expensive cologne Karen ever bought me. Mark Twain once said, "Never let your schooling interfere with your education." I'd add my own twist. Never let your past interfere with your future on a farm. Those early mornings became my meditation. Walking through the property at sunrise, coffee steaming in my hands, I'd watch the mist rise off the fields like the ghosts of yesterday's troubles floating away. The work was backbreaking. Fixing fences, clearing weeds, learning why farmers go to bed when city folks are just getting started. But every sore muscle felt like proof that I was building something real with my own two hands. The learning curve was steeper than a San Francisco street. I killed more plants than a biblical plague, burned dinner so often the smoke detector became my cooking timer, and had philosophical debates with those chickens who clearly thought I was an idiot. Spoiler alert, the chickens were probably right. But slowly, piece by piece, the farm started responding to my amateur efforts like a patient teacher with a particularly slow student. 3 months in, I'd managed to coax some decent vegetables from the ground and even got a few beehives producing honey. Nothing fancy. Mind you, my tomatoes looked like they'd been through a blender, and my honey yield was modest enough to make professional beekeepers chuckle. But they were mine. Every crooked carrot and every drop of golden sweetness represented something I'd never experienced before. Genuine accomplishment. That's when I decided to test the local market waters. Picture this. A middle-aged guy with farmer's tan lines and optimism he couldn't afford, setting up a card table at the county farmer's market with 3 wonky tomatoes and 2 mason jars of honey. I felt like a kid at a lemonade stand, except the kid had a mortgage and existential dread. Then I saw her, Kate, standing by the homemade bread stand, her smile as warm as a fresh-baked loaf. Time didn't just stop. It rewound 25 years to when we were kids running through these same county roads, dreaming about everything and nothing at the same time. Lightning doesn't strike twice, they say, but apparently nobody told my heart that particular rule. Her eyes held all the memories of our child adventures, building tree forts, catching fireflies, believing the world was full of endless possibilities. But there was something else there too. Pain, maybe, or hope, probably both. When our eyes met across that crowded market, the fog of my recent disasters suddenly lifted, and I remembered what it felt like to be human. We ended up at the local diner, sharing coffee that was stronger than my business plan, and conversation that flowed like we'd never spent a day apart. Kate told me about her divorce, how her ex-husband had been the golden boy of local business until he decided their marriage was interfering with his networking opportunities. Translation: he cheated with his secretary and left Kate with nothing but a house she couldn't afford and a trust fund of broken promises. But here's the thing about Kate. Adversity hadn't broken her spirit. It had refined it. She talked about wanting to build something meaningful, something that would prove to herself and everyone else that she was more than just another casualty of modern romance. Her dreams weren't about revenge. They were about redemption. Personal, powerful redemption. We both were walking wounded, survivors of life's tendency to kick you when you're down and then charge you for privilege. But sitting there, listening to her laugh at my stories about arguing with livestock, I realized something profound. Sometimes the best partnerships are formed between people who've already learned how to fail gracefully. What started as coffee conversations became farm collaborations. Kate would drive over after her job at the local insurance office. After the divorce, I just needed something predictable, she told me. Insurance may be boring, but at least it paid the bills while I figure out my next move. She'd trade her business clothes for overalls and help me figure out why my corn looked like something Picasso would have planted. She had this natural instinct for growing things, like she'd been born with soil under her fingernails and sunshine in her smile. Our trips to other farms became adventure expeditions. We'd learn about crop rotation from crusty old-timers who'd been working the land since before cell phones existed. We'd study how proper farmers organize their operations, taking mental notes and sharing theories about sustainable agriculture over dinner. Kate had this way of asking questions that made even the most tight-lipped farmer open up like a book. The honey business started taking off in ways that surprised both of us. Word spread about the quality of our product, and soon we had regular customers requesting specific amounts for their own cooking projects. Each jar we sold felt like a small victory, proof that maybe I wasn't destined to fail at everything I touched. Kate's marketing ideas turned my amateur operation into something resembling an actual business. Our evening conversations on the farmhouse porch became the highlight of my days. We'd watch the sunset paint the sky in colors that no artist could capture, talking about everything from sustainable farming to second chances to why the universe seemed determined to test people just when they were starting to believe in themselves again. These weren't just business discussions. They were the foundation of something deeper. Then came the rainy evening that changed everything. We were sorting through old boxes in the attic, looking for anything useful Grandpa Joe might have left behind. The attic smelled like memories and dust, filled with the accumulated treasures and forgotten projects of a man who'd lived fully. Kate was more thorough than me, examining every item like an archaeologist uncovering ancient secrets. That's when she found it. Grandpa Joe's cookbook. Not just any cookbook. His personal collection of recipes, handwritten notes, cooking wisdom, and family stories all bound together in a leather cover that had seen decades of kitchen adventures. The pages were yellow with age and marked with flower fingerprints, but every recipe told a story about American family life from a simpler time. Kate's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Eddie, this is treasure. We should open a restaurant. A place where people can taste authentic American farm cooking, just like your grandfather made. Her enthusiasm was infectious, spreading through the dusty attic like wildfire. We could call it Taste of Hard Times, show people what real food tastes like when it's made with actual care and honest ingredients. The idea hit me like a revelation. Everything suddenly made sense. The farm, the honey business, finding Kate again, even the cookbook appearing just when we needed inspiration. We weren't just talking about opening a restaurant. We were talking about preserving something important, something real in a world that had forgotten the value of authentic experiences. We spent the next few weeks planning like generals preparing for battle. Business plans, menu ideas, location scouting. Our dreams were taking shape faster than spring crops after rain. Kate's business background and my newfound farming knowledge seemed like the perfect combination. We had passion, we had purpose, and we had Grandpa Joe's recipes as our secret weapon. Then reality crashed the party like an uninvited guest. Banks looked at our proposal and laughed, not literally, but their polite rejections felt worse than outright mockery. Too risky, they said. Unproven concept. Insufficient collateral. The same song I've been hearing my entire adult life, just with different verses. But the real villain in our story was Mr. Squiggly, the local licensing official who seemed to take personal pleasure in finding new obstacles to our dreams. Every time we thought we cleared one hurdle, he'd discover another regulation we'd supposedly violated or another permit we absolutely needed. His office visits felt like medieval torture sessions conducted by a man who'd clearly peaked in high school hall monitor duty. The guy was either completely incompetent or deliberately obstructive. Maybe both. He'd demand inspections for things that didn't exist, require permits that other businesses had never heard of, and generally make our lives miserable with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found his calling as a professional dream crusher. Power corrupts, and apparently even tiny amounts of bureaucratic power can corrupt absolutely. We'd sit on the porch after particularly frustrating days, watching the sun set over our dreams, feeling like we were trapped in some cosmic joke. The silence between us spoke louder than any argument. Here we were, Two people who'd finally found each other in a shared purpose, only to discover that the world wasn't interested in what we had to offer. Kate stared at the boxes we hadn't finished sorting, her expression thoughtful. What's in those other boxes, Eddie? Maybe there's something your grandfather left for exactly this kind of rainy day. Her voice carried a note of hope that I desperately wanted to believe in, even though my track record with hope hadn't been particularly stellar. And that's when I realized something important. Sometimes the answers you need are lying right under your feet, waiting for you to be desperate enough to look in places you'd never considered before. Our rainy day was just beginning, but maybe somewhere in that attic, among Grandpa Joe's forgotten treasures, the sun was waiting to break through the clouds. Maybe, just maybe, the old man had left us more than recipes and memories. And as we pulled another dusty crate toward the light, I had no idea that what lay inside would change not just our plans, but maybe our lives and the rules we thought we had to live by. That dusty attic was like stepping into a time capsule that hadn't been opened since Reagan was president. The air smelled like forgotten memories and cedar moths, with cobwebs hanging like nature's curtains across boxes that probably hadn't seen daylight since the Carter administration. Kate and I climbed those creaky stairs like amateur archaeologists, armed with nothing but flashlights and the desperate hope that Grandpa Joe had left us something more useful than his collection of expired farm equipment warranties. Every step creaked like the house was complaining about being disturbed. The floorboards groaned under our weight, and somewhere in the darkness, something small and furry scurried away from our invasion. Kate was braver than me, diving into corners I would have avoided, pulling out boxes with the enthusiasm of someone who actually believed in treasure hunts. We found the usual attic archaeology, Christmas decorations from the 1970s, photo albums where everyone looked like they were posing for a witness protection program, and enough moth-eaten clothing to stock a vintage shop that specialized in authentically damaged. I was starting to think our big discovery would be Grandpa's collection of Reader's Digest condensed books when Kate called out from the far corner. She was kneeling beside a pile of old blankets, holding something that looked like it had survived multiple decades of neglect. A shoebox. Not just any shoebox. This thing was held together by duct tape, hope, and what looked like 30 years of dust. The kind of container that screamed important stuff inside, or complete garbage that someone couldn't throw away. Eddie, what do you think this is? Kate's voice carried that note of excitement you hear when someone finds something they weren't looking for, but might actually want. I shrugged with the confidence of a man who'd been disappointed by mysterious boxes before. Probably Grandpa's collection of outdated seed catalogs, or maybe his secret stash of fishing licenses from 1973. Kate had that look women get when they're about to prove you wrong about something. She carefully peeled away the tape like she was defusing a bomb, and when she lifted the lid, we both stared at what appeared to be the most anticlimactic treasure in history. Baseball cards. Dozens of them, stacked like they were waiting for a card game that never happened. I remember Grandpa Joe collecting these things, but I'd always figured it was just old man nostalgia, like how some guys collect coins or bottle caps. Well, I said with all the sarcasm I could muster, looks like we struck it rich. 30 cents worth of cardboard and a lifetime supply of childhood memories. But Kate was already picking through them with the focus of someone who actually paid attention to details. Her expression changed from curious to confused to something I'd never seen before, like she just discovered the meaning of life hidden in a stack of old sports memorabilia. She held up one card, staring at it like it was speaking to her in a language only she understood. Eddie. Her voice was different now, quieter but somehow more intense. Eddie, look at this. She was holding a card that had caught her attention because it was wrapped in a separate plastic sleeve, unlike the others, and there was what looked like a faded signature across the bottom corner. The card showed a baseball player in an old-fashioned uniform, the kind of photo they took when cameras required actual skill to operate. The guy looked like he could have been anyone's grandfather, except younger and wearing a Yankees uniform. I squinted at the card with all the enthusiasm of someone who'd never understood sports collectibles. Mickey Mantle. I read from the faded text. Okay, so Grandpa liked the Yankees. Half of America liked the Yankees. What's the big deal? But Kate was already pulling out her phone, typing with fingers that seemed to be moving faster than her brain could process. The silence in that attic became loud enough to hear dust settling. Kate's face went through more expressions than a bad actor in a soap opera: confusion, disbelief, shock, and something that might have been hysteria. She showed me her phone screen, and the numbers I saw there made about as much sense as quantum physics explained by a toddler. 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle rookie card, she read, her voice shaking like she was announcing the end of the world. Recent auction sales range from $5 to $10 million. I stared at her, then at the card, then back at her. Then I started laughing because clearly one of us had lost our minds, and it probably wasn't me. $5 million for a piece of cardboard. I took the card from her hands like it might explode. It felt like cardboard. Expensive, apparently magical cardboard, but still just cardboard. Kate, are you sure you're reading that right? Maybe it's $5 and you're seeing things because we've been breathing too much attic dust. But Kate was already cross-referencing multiple websites, each one confirming what seemed like the most ridiculous joke the universe had ever played. We sat there in that dusty attic, surrounded by decades of accumulated junk, holding what might have been our ticket to a completely different life. It was like finding out your old homework was actually worth more than most people's houses. The next hour was a blur of frantic research, phone calls to auction houses, and increasingly hysterical conversations about whether we were looking at reproduction, a fake, or the kind of miracle that happens to other people in movies about lottery winners. Every website we checked, every expert we contacted, kept confirming the same impossible truth. Vince Lombardi once said, "The difference between a successful person and others is not a lack of strength, not a lack of knowledge, but rather a lack of will." Well, we had the will. We just never imagined we'd need it to handle sudden, inexplicable wealth that came in the form of a 70-year-old baseball card. The trip to New York felt like transporting nuclear weapons. Every bump in the road made me check the protective case we'd bought for the card. Every person who looked at us seemed like a potential thief who somehow knew we were carrying more money than most small towns see in a year. Kate and I took turns holding the case, neither of us willing to let out of our sight for longer than it took to use a restroom. The authentication expert looked like he'd stepped out of a movie about art dealers. Expensive glasses, careful hands, and the kind of serious expression that suggested he'd seen enough fakes to spot them from across the room. Watching him examine our card was like waiting for medical test results that would determine the rest of our lives. He used magnifying glasses, special lights, and equipment I couldn't even identify. Every minute felt like an hour. Kate and I sat there holding hands like teenagers, waiting to find out if we'd passed a test we hadn't studied for. When he finally looked up and nodded, I felt like I was watching the moon landing in real time. "Congratulations," he said with the calm professionalism of someone who delivered life-changing news for a living. "You're looking at an authentic 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle in exceptional condition. You're very wealthy people." For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was about to thrive. Wealthy people. Us. The former failure and the woman who'd been rebuilding her life one insurance policy at a time. The auction house moved faster than government bureaucracy, but slower than our racing hearts. They scheduled the sale for the following week, which gave us just enough time to panic, celebrate, panic again, and then start making lists of everything we'd do with money we didn't yet have but probably would soon. Auction day arrived like Christmas morning, mixed with a college final exam. The auction house was filled with people who looked like they bought and sold million-dollar items before breakfast. We sat in the back row, trying to blend in with collectors who probably owned small countries as weekend hobbies. When they brought out our card, projected on screens around the room like it was a Mona Lisa, I felt a pride I'd never experienced before. That was ours. That little piece of cardboard had been sitting in Grandpa Joe's attic while we'd been struggling with banks and bureaucrats, waiting for exactly the right moment to change everything. The bidding started at $1 million, which already sounded like play money to me. Then 2 million, 3, 5. Each number felt like someone else's reality, like we were watching a movie about rich people doing rich people things. Kate and I held hands so tightly I'm surprised we didn't cut off circulation. $8 million. The auctioneer's voice cut through the room like a sword. 8.5. $9 million. My heart was beating so hard, I was worried it might be audible to the people sitting around us. $9.5 million. Going once, going twice, sold. $9.5 million. For a baseball card that had been sitting in a shoebox under old blankets in an attic in Missouri. After the auction house took their cut, after taxes, after all the fees and expenses, we were looking at more than $7 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. More than enough to build our restaurant. And enough left over to live like actual human beings instead of broke dreamers. We sat in the car outside the auction house for 20 minutes without saying a word. Kate stared at the cashier's check like it might disappear if she blinked. I kept waiting for someone to run out and tell us there'd been a mistake, that the real owners wanted their card back. The silence was heavier than the moment itself. Two people who'd gone from broke to wealthy in the time it takes to eat lunch. Driving home from New York, with a cashier's check in our pocket and dreams that suddenly had backing, I realized something profound. Sometimes the things that look like junk are actually treasures waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Sometimes failure is just success that's still in the packaging. Back home, we decided to have the rest of Grandpa's collection authenticated too. Turned out we'd struck gold more than once. 10 other cards were worth anywhere from $1,000 to $100,000 each. Not Mickey Mantle money, but still more than most people see in years. We decided not to sell those. Instead, we bought proper storage cases and put them in a bank safety deposit box. The experts told us these cards would likely double or triple in value over the next decade. We figured they'd make a nice nest egg for our future kids, assuming we had any. Turned out Grandpa Joe had been better at investing than any of us had realized. He'd just been playing a longer game than the rest of us understood. Maybe he'd known all along that his collection would be someone's salvation someday. Maybe he'd been the smartest investor in the family, and we'd just been too young to understand his strategy. With that incredible sum in our hands, we knew we could finally stop dreaming and start building. Our restaurant wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a project with funding, a timeline, and the kind of backing that turns dreams into reality. The Taste of Hard Times was about to become something real, something we could touch and smell and serve to actual customers. But as I learned that day, money solves a lot of problems, but it also creates new ones you never saw coming. The people who've been putting obstacles in our path didn't know yet that we just changed the rules of the game completely. They were about to find out that sometimes the biggest underdogs have the most surprising comebacks. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see their faces when they realized what had just happened. With $7 million burning a hole in our bank account, Kate and I threw ourselves into building our restaurant with the kind of energy usually reserved for people trying to outrun hurricanes. Kate's farm was close to the main highway, making it the perfect location for what we were calling Taste of Hard Times. We weren't just opening a restaurant. We were creating a time machine that would transport people back to when America knew how to cook real food. Every detail mattered. We scoured antique shops for authentic 1930s furniture, found original Coca-Cola signs from when a nickel actually bought you something, and tracked down kitchen equipment that looked like it belonged in Norman Rockwell paintings. The dining room got rough-hewn wooden tables that could have hosted Depression-era family dinners, and the walls were covered with vintage farm tools that actually meant something instead of just looking rustic. We documented everything on social media because apparently that's what successful businesses do now. Every nail we hammered, every wall we painted, every piece of period-appropriate equipment we installed. It all went online. Kate had a natural talent for making our construction project look like the most exciting thing happening in Missouri. By the time we were ready to open, Taste of Hard Times had hundreds of followers waiting to see if we could deliver on our promises. The menu was pure Grandpa Joe, hearty meals that filled your stomach and your soul without requiring a dictionary to understand. Pot roast that fell apart when you looked at it wrong, cornbread that could convert vegetarians, and apple pie that made grown men weep with nostalgia. We weren't trying to impress food critics. We were trying to remind people what their great-grandmothers used to cook before convenience became more important than flavor. Opening day arrived like Christmas morning mixed with a root canal. We'd invested our hearts, our money, and our sanity into this place. And now we had to find out if the world wanted what we were selling. The local newspaper had written a nice article. Our social media followers were posting supportive comments, and we'd sent invitations to everyone we could think of. We were ready for success. Instead, we got reality. The first 2 weeks were like hosting a party where nobody showed up. We'd stand behind a counter, watching empty tables mock our optimism while our carefully prepared food went uneaten. The few customers we did get seemed confused by the concept of authentic American cooking, like they'd expected us to serve molecular gastronomy or fusion cuisine. Well, I told Kate one particularly slow Tuesday, try and keep my voice light. Maybe our taste of hard times is a little too authentic for people who've never actually experienced hard times. We started joking that our business plan was too honest for its own good. Meanwhile, Mr. Squiggly, our favorite local bureaucrat, kept finding new ways to make our lives miserable with surprise inspections and mysterious code violations that seemed to exist only in his imagination. The man was like a persistent rash that wouldn't respond to treatment. Every week brought a new crisis. Our hand-washing station wasn't exactly the right temperature. Our fire extinguisher was mounted 3 inches too high. Our parking lot needed different signage. Kate started referring to him as the fun police, which was generous considering what I want to call him. Then came the day that changed everything. I was driving to town for supplies, my mind occupied with calculations about how long our money would last if business didn't pick up, when I spotted a guy on the roadside with a flat tire. His car was one of those expensive SUVs that suggested he wasn't accustomed to manual labor, and he looked about as capable of changing a tire as I'd been at farming when I first arrived. I'd never been a good Samaritan type, but something about his helpless expression reminded me of myself during those early days on the farm. Plus, Kate had been drilling basic human decency into my thick skull. So I pulled over. "Need some help there?" I called out, already knowing the answer, but asking anyway because that's what decent people do. Turns out the guy was more grateful than a lottery winner. We got his tire changed in about 20 minutes, and he insisted on following me back to the restaurant to buy me lunch as a thank you. He introduced himself as Jake, some kind of travel blogger, but I figured he was probably one of those guys who wrote reviews for audiences of about 12 people and their mothers. Jake ordered the pot roast special and asked if he could film a quick video while he ate. I shrugged and said sure, thinking it might be good practice for when we eventually got real customers with real social media followings. What I didn't expect was his reaction when he took that first bite. The man's face lit up like he'd just discovered fire. He started talking about how the food reminded him of Sunday dinners at his grandmother's farm, how everything tasted like it had been made with actual love instead of profit margins. He filmed himself eating with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been living on airport food for months, describing each bite like he was narrating a documentary about lost American traditions. That night, Kate and I went to bed thinking we'd had a nice day with one satisfied customer. We woke up to our phones buzzing like angry hornets. Jake, it turned out, wasn't just any travel blogger. He was a travel blogger with millions of followers who hung on his every recommendation like it was gospel straight from food heaven. His post about Taste of Hard Times had gone viral overnight. Our little restaurant in the middle of Missouri nowhere was suddenly being shared, liked, and commented on by people from California to New York. Jake had called us the most authentic American dining experience I've found in 20 years of travel, and apparently his audience believed him. By noon, we had a line of cars stretching down the highway. People were driving from 3 states away to eat Grandpa Joe's recipes. Our phone rang constantly with reservation requests, food bloggers wanting interviews, and reporters asking about our overnight success story. We went from empty tables to a 6-week waiting list in the time it takes most people to decide what to have for lunch. Seneca once said, "Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." We'd been preparing without knowing it, and Jake had been the opportunity we never saw coming. Even Mr. Squiggly suddenly became cooperative, probably because shutting down the area's biggest tourist attraction would have made him about as popular as a tornado at a picnic. Success felt surreal, like we were living in someone else's life and hoping they wouldn't come back to reclaim it. Every day brought new challenges: hiring staff, managing crowds, maintaining quality while serving 10 times more people than we planned for. But these were good problems. The kind you dream about having when you're staring at empty tables and wondering if you've made a terrible mistake. 6 months later, Kate and I decided it was time to make our partnership official in every sense of the word. Our wedding was everything I'd never dared to dream about. Held right there at the restaurant, surrounded by friends, good food, and the kind of happiness that feels too good to be real. For the first time in my adult life, everything was going exactly right. That's when they showed up. Sarah and Owen, my dear family members who'd written me off as a permanent disappointment, suddenly appeared at my wedding reception, looking like they'd just discovered I was secretly related to royalty. Kate had convinced me to invite them. It's the right thing to do, Eddie. Family is family. And despite my better judgment, I'd sent them an invitation. The transformation in their attitudes was so complete it bordered on science fiction. Sarah hugged me with the enthusiasm of someone who just remembered we were related, gushing about how proud she was of my success and how she'd always known I had it in me. Right. Owen, meanwhile, was already networking, shaking hands with our guests and casually mentioning his business background to anyone who'd listen. The man could smell opportunity from 50 miles away. "Eddie, this is incredible," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes taking inventory of everything from our catering setup to the obvious prosperity of our guests. "You've really outdone yourself. We should definitely stay in touch more often." Translation: now that you have money, we're suddenly interested in being family again. Owen was more direct in his approach, which I almost appreciated for its honesty. He pulled me aside between dances to share his thoughts on expansion opportunities, marketing synergies, and other business school buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant nothing. "I've got some ideas that could really take this to the next level," he said with the confidence of someone who'd never actually built anything himself. Watching them work the room was like observing sharks who'd just discovered a wounded seal. They weren't here to celebrate my happiness. They were here to figure out how to profit from it. Their eyes kept scanning our setup, calculating costs and revenues like they were already planning their investment strategy. Then Sarah asked the question I've been dreading. "So, Eddie, this is all wonderful, but how did you afford all this? We know you've never been exactly financially successful." Her smile was sweet enough to cause diabetes, but her eyes were pure accountant. She wanted details, and she wanted them now. I looked at Kate, who gave me a slight nod of support. We discussed this possibility, my family's sudden interest in my finances, and agreed that honesty would be like throwing raw meat to hungry wolves. My relatives had a talent for turning other people's success into their own legal complications. "Oh, that," I said with a casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "This is all Kate's doing. Her father left her quite a collection, and one piece turned out to be extremely valuable. Lucky us, right?" I watched their faces carefully, seeing the exact moment when their dreams of shared inheritance died a quiet death. The disappointment was immediate and beautiful. Sarah's smile flickered like a light bulb on its last legs, and Owen's expression suggested someone had just explained that his business degree was printed on toilet paper. They couldn't challenge Kate's inheritance without looking like complete monsters, and they had no legal claim to property that had never belonged to our side of the family. But I knew this wasn't over. Sarah and Owen weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully, especially when millions of dollars were involved. They'd regroup, strategize, and come back with new angles. For now, though, I was content to watch them smile through gritted teeth while pretending to be happy for our success. Success, I realized, doesn't just attract customers and opportunities. It also draws people who think your good fortune somehow belongs to them, people who measure relationships by bank balances and see family gatherings as networking events. The vultures had arrived, and they were wearing their Sunday best. This was just the opening round in what would become a much longer game. My past had come knocking, but I wasn't the same guy who used to open every door. I'd learned to be selective about who I let into my life, and more importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the best response to unwanted visitors is a polite smile and a firmly locked gate. The next round was going to be even more interesting. Success has this funny way of making you hungry for more, not because you're greedy, but because you finally understand what you're capable of building. 6 months after our wedding, with tastes of hard times running like a well-oiled machine, and our bank account looking healthier than a marathon runner, Kate and I started talking about expansion. Not the kind of growth that destroys what you built, but the kind that honors it. That's when we decided to open a second location at Grandpa Joe's original farm. It was further from the highway, tucked away down country roads that GPS systems sometimes forgot existed. But that isolation was exactly what made it special. The old pond reflected clouds like a mirror. Ancient oak trees provided shade that felt like natural air conditioning. And the whole place had this timeless quality that made you forget the outside world existed. We called it Grandpa Joe's Retreat, a place where time moved slower and conversation mattered more than cell phone reception. While our first location served the highway crowd looking for authentic American food, this one catered to people seeking something deeper. City folks who needed to remember what silence sounded like, families wanting their kids to see where food actually comes from, couples celebrating anniversaries with something more meaningful than another chain restaurant. The renovation took months, but every day felt like unwrapping a present. We restored the original farmhouse to its 1940s glory, complete with wraparound porch that practically demanded rocking chairs and sweet tea. The barn became our main dining hall, with exposed beams and windows that framed the countryside like living paintings. We even restored Grandpa's old root cellar into a wine storage area, because apparently successful restaurateurs are supposed to know about wine pairings. Opening day for the second location felt different from the first. This wasn't about proving ourselves anymore. We'd already done that. This was about honoring Grandpa Joe's legacy and creating something that would outlast our own ambitions. We invited everyone who'd supported us, including Mr. Squiggly, who showed up looking like he'd been forced to attend his own execution. Watching that bureaucratic nightmare try to find fault with our operation was better than cable television. The man walked around with his clipboard, desperately searching for violations that didn't exist, while our guests enjoyed food that made them nostalgic for times they'd never actually lived through. Success, it turns out, is the best revenge against small-minded people who confuse power with importance. The evening was perfect, warm enough for the porch, cool enough to appreciate the fireflies starting their nightly dance. Kate was glowing a way that had nothing to do with the sunset, and everything to do with the news she'd shared with me that morning. We were going to be parents. The thought still made my head spin in the best possible way. I was standing near the entrance, watching our guests enjoy the kind of evening that Norman Rockwell would have painted if he'd been a restaurant reviewer, when I saw her. Karen. She appeared at the edge of our celebration, like a ghost from a movie I thought was over. Time hadn't been kind to her. She looked tired, defeated, like someone who'd been running from something and finally got caught. She stood there for a long moment, just watching me, and I could see her working up the courage to approach. When she finally walked over, each step looked like it cost her something. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her clothes expensive but wrinkled, and she carried herself like someone who'd forgotten how to be confident. "Eddie," she said, and her voice cracked on just that one word. I made such a terrible mistake." The words tumbled out like she'd been practicing them for months, but still couldn't get them right. She told me about her banker, how he'd turned out to be everything I wasn't: charming, successful, and completely dishonest. Their prenup had been ironclad, designed to protect his assets from gold diggers like her, except she hadn't realized she was a gold digger until it was too late. He'd left her for someone younger, richer, and presumably less familiar with his collection of lies. Karen had lost everything. The house, the lifestyle, the sense of security she traded me for. She looked pathetic standing there in our success, begging for a second chance from a man she'd thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. "I know I don't deserve it," she continued, tears starting to fall. "But I'm hoping you might, that maybe we could." She couldn't even finish the sentence. The woman who'd once been so confident in her decision to upgrade was now asking me to downgrade back to her. Life's sense of humor is darker than most people realize. I looked at her, really looked, and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. John Lennon was right when he said life is what happens while you're making other plans. My plans had changed completely, and hers had fallen apart entirely. The difference was I'd learned to build something real instead of just chasing something shiny. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm, "you made your choice. You chose your path, and I chose mine. I have a real family now, a real wife, and a real life that doesn't include space of the past. I could see Kate watching from across the yard, one hand resting on her still flat stomach where our future was growing. My heart belongs to someone else now, I continued, and you lost your access to the day you decided I wasn't worth keeping. I wish you well, I really do, but my door is closed to you. It's not about anger or revenge. It's about moving forward instead of backward. Her face crumpled like a paper bag, but I felt only peace. The kind of peace that comes from finally being free of something that used to have power over you. She walked away without another word, disappearing back into whatever life she'd built from the ashes of her choices. She didn't look back, and I didn't call after her. I watched her go and felt something lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was still there. Sometimes the best closure is realizing you don't need closure. You just need to keep building something better. Kate appeared at my side, slipping her arm through mine. "You okay?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Never better," I told her, and meant it completely. We stood there watching our guests enjoy the evening we'd created, surrounded by the success we'd built together, planning for the family we were about to start. 2 years later, we're sitting on the porch of our new house on the farm, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that would make a professional photographer weep with envy. Our 18-month-old son is toddling around the yard, chasing fireflies with the determination of someone who believes he can actually catch them. Kate watches him with that smile that mothers get when they're watching their children discover the world. Our restaurants are thriving, our marriage is stronger than steel, and our future looks brighter than a summer morning. The journey from professional failure to this porch took longer than I'd hoped, but less time than I'd feared. Every mistake, every rejection, every moment when I thought life was determined to keep me down, all of it was just preparation for this. The universe has a twisted sense of timing, but apparently it knows what it's doing. We'd both been betrayed once. Me by Karen, Kate by her ex-husband. But those betrayals turned out to be the best things that ever happened to us. If Karen hadn't left me for her banker, I might never have moved to the farm. If Kate's husband hadn't cheated, she might never have been free to find something real. Sometimes the worst moments are just the opening act for the best ones. Grandpa Joe's baseball cards gave us the money to build our dreams. But the real treasure was learning that happiness isn't something you find. It's something you build, one choice at a time, with people who believe in the same things you do. Success isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments like this, when you're sitting next to someone you love, planning for a future you're excited to live. Sarah and Owen still send Christmas cards with subtle hints about business opportunities and family investments. Mr. Squiggly found new restaurants to harass after we became too successful to mess with. Karen, as far as I know, is somewhere trying to rebuild her life from whatever pieces she managed to salvage. I wish them all well, but from a safe distance. Somewhere in the background, the scent of apple pie tells me everything is right in the world. This is what contentment feels like, not the desperate happiness of someone trying to convince themselves they're satisfied, but the deep peace of someone who knows they're exactly where they belong. Life is strange, isn't it? Sometimes the path to your dreams leads through disasters you never saw coming. Sometimes the people you think you need turn out to be obstacles, and sometimes the obstacles turn out to be exactly what you need to become who you were meant to be. The key is not losing hope when everything looks hopeless, and remembering that endings are usually just beginnings wearing disguises. Real happiness, as it turns out, can be found in money or status or other people's approval. It lives in love, family, and the smell of fresh-baked pie cooling on a windowsill. It lives in the satisfaction of building something meaningful with your own hands and sharing it with people who matter. It lives in knowing that tomorrow will bring new challenges, but you're strong enough to handle whatever comes next. Maybe life isn't about what you lost, but about what you're brave enough to build from the pieces that remain. Maybe failure is just success that hasn't figured out what it wants to be yet. Maybe the biggest disasters are actually the universe's way of clearing space for something better to grow. So here's my question for you, sitting there listening to this crazy story of mine. What would you do if life gave you one more chance to build something real? What would you create if you stopped being afraid of failing and started being excited about the possibility of succeeding. Because chances are your second chance is waiting for you right now. The gate is open. All that's left is for you to step through.